Well, thank you so much, Bethanne, for joining me today. Because again, you've basically created a book that resonates with so many people and is so important because we haven't really heard about this. So, first of all, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, Shashwati. I am so delighted to be here. And I do believe that there are parts of my book that will resonate with lots of people, not just people who experience depression or mental illness, but people who have gone through tough
Mhm.
times.
Yeah, I totally agree, and and we're going to get into it, but it absolutely brilliant. But first of all, without further ado, I just want to do a quick introduction to the lovely Bethanne, who is a stalwart in the publishing industry as a critic and as the book maven on Twitter, where she created the popular hashtag Friday Reads and regularly comments on books and literary ideas to over 200,000 followers, which is amazing. Her work appears frequently in the Los Angeles Times, as well as the Washington Post, NPR Books, and the Literary Hub, which I love as well. She sits on the board of the Penn Faulkner Foundation and has served on the board of the National Books Critics Circle. She's the host of the Missing Pages podcast and can be found at bethannepatrick.com. So, I've got to ask about the book, which is what is double depression for our listeners?
Well, that is the question to start with, certainly, because as you and I were discussing beforehand, most people, many people have not heard about this condition. And double depression is something, this is how it was explained to me by my psychiatrist.
Mm,
And I want to emphasize the book is not written by a medical professional. I'm not one. Um, it is not meant to be a how-to guide or
mm,
substitute for your own, professional medical care and treatment in mental health,
mm,
mental illness. But I was told that double depression happens when a person who has a close relative with severe bipolar syndrome, something happens genetically, and I guess the bipolar mutates into just depression. So there's no mania. You start, let's say, if you put the bar for quote unquote normal, because we know there is no normal, if
mm,
you set it at a certain level, someone with double depression always starts a little lower.
mm,
Okay. And then in times of severe stress, which might be situational or might be chemical, um, that person with chronic depression goes into a major or clinical depression. So it cycles. And what I hadn't known my entire life was that I was sad for a reason. I was
mm,
sad because my brain was depressed. My brain was chemically different, and then whenever I had something stressful happen, and we all have stressful
mm.
incidents, it would trigger my brain to become more depressed. And then I'll stop in just a second. What happens, and you see this in my book when I do meet this psychiatrist who understands the condition, he said, "You're going to have to be on medication for the rest of your
Mm,
life because you've gone beyond the algorithm," meaning I have had too many episodes of clinical depression.
mm,
And so my brain now, what that means is my brain has almost trained itself when it's stressed to go down, to go way down. And
right.
that can be, that can be a life-threatening problem, as we all know, with depression. So I am medicated for life, and I'm very happy about that. And I do not make recommendations for other people. I
Right.
don't say you must get medication for
Yeah.
depression or don't ever try it. This is just what works for me. So double depression, though, is pretty frightening and overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm like, it was really interesting to read about it because again, I'd never come across it, and also I guess we hear more about the ones that are, always discussed in that sense, in terms of like borderline, bipolar. But I was wondering, so what was the effect on you when people around you didn't understand the severity of it? Because obviously it was really severe.
You know, also an incredible question, because I'll tell you about the effect, and then I'll tell you one of the things that I really want to get out to the world at large. The effect, it was so lonely
Mm.
because nobody wants to be who's the moaning Myrtle in the Harry Potter movies? Nobody wants to be moaning Myrtle to their friends and family, constantly complaining, constantly saying, I'm sad, I'm sad, I'm sad. Well, what are you going to do about it? They would
Mm.
want to say, take some action. And I would try the things, one of the famous things that they say is go out and take a walk, get some fresh air. It wouldn't help. And it's
Mm.
not because they weren't wrong, they weren't right. It just didn't work for me, right?
Yeah.
So it was very lonely because at a certain point I thought I can't keep bothering people with this. I can't keep talking about the same thing. I thought I was doing the right thing. I
Mm.
was going to therapy and going to see a
Yeah.
psychiatrist and taking medications. I thought I was, well, why am I still so miserable? And no one before the neuropharmacology expert that I saw
Mm.
in 2016, no one ever mentioned double depression. But here's the thing about how people reacted and how it, you know, sort of made me crawl back into myself. What I want everyone to understand is that depression and other mental illnesses do not care about your privilege or lack thereof. They
Mm.
don't care if you're rich or poor, fat or thin, highly accomplished or, lying down doing nothing. Mental illness doesn't care. It
No.
just comes in. And so people would this is what I would hear a great deal of. People would say, "You have nothing to be sad about. Look at your life. You have this wonderful spouse, beautiful children, work that you love. So how can you?" And listen, there is situational depression, right?
Mm.
Some you lose a job. Someone you love dies. These things are valid too.
Yeah.
However, chemically based depression and other mental illnesses, they don't care. They're like, "So what? You have these beautiful kids who need your attention. Guess what? The dementors are coming." Clearly, I've been a little my older daughter, my kids are both adults now, grew up with the Harry Potter
Yeah,
books.
right. Yeah, the good
When she
references.
comes home at the holidays, we're always that's why I've got it on the brain. I am not, necessarily myself the biggest Harry Potter person. Anyway.
Well, I totally understand the references, so that definitely helps. Um, I found really interesting was your relationship with your family, especially your not necessarily. I found the relationship between obviously your daughters and your husband really interesting, but also your other family, which is your mum, your sister. And so, how
Yes.
much do you think intergenerational trauma can be a factor in this kind of depression? Do you think?
I think it's a huge factor. And I think one of the tough things is that intergenerational trauma has more than one facet. So there's the intergenerational trauma that is, in your present, you, the person who has this illness.
Mm.
So that might mean, your parents, raised you with some dysfunction. There were
Mm.
some other family members who were troublesome, abusive, etc. But then there's also the intergenerational trauma that comes in our our very bones, as I
Yeah.
talk about in the book,
Hmm.
epigenetics
Yeah.
and the genes in our bone marrow. I'm not actually taught like it's not woo woo, like, oh, we
Yeah.
have stories in our bones. It's actually science, right?
Yeah.
And we know now that what happens to our ancestors can be
Yeah.
encoded in our DNA. And so you've got that other facet of whatever. And so it's not necessarily directly from your parents. It could be from your grandparents
Yeah.
or your great grandparents. And it's really, when, for instance, when people say, something skips a generation, I think that's what they mean, even though they don't know,
Yeah.
because it has come to children from their grandparents,
Yeah.
and I think that's fascinating, and really tough. It's really tough to think that we can be doing our best, but
Mm.
still be affected by terrible things that happened to our forebears. That's really hard. And my chapter Snake Hill,
Mm.
which, someday I'll get a chance to revise it. There's so much more I want to say there,
Mm.
but it is about the distance I felt from my mother's family. These were people who could have been very close to me, my
Mm.
aunt, my uncle, their children. And for her own, and I think very good reasons, my mother wanted to keep her children at arm's length
Mm.
from people who were having really tough lives and sometimes making, decisions that didn't work out well for them.
Yeah.
And she was trying so hard to give us the best shot at a future. But that breaks families apart.
Yeah, I'm no definitely. I could totally sense that. I remember reading a book called It Doesn't Start With You, Mark Wallen, which
Mhm.
obviously goes into epigenetics and talks about the Holocaust survivors and things like that. And they're just generations after generations of like suffering and just low mood and depression that comes in. So yeah, I completely
Yeah.
see that. But like, and then you discuss obviously your family relationships with your husband, which obviously has been amazing in that sense. That here you are together, and then
Yes.
obviously with your daughters. And how do you manage that family relationship and maintain it? Because obviously, I know it hasn't been easy or smooth sailing.
Thank you for acknowledging that. It's absolutely true. And we just we had a family vacation right after Christmas, during New Year's week, and it wasn't perfect. Nothing's ever
Mm,
perfect, but it was really, really good. Like,
mm,
excellent. And I thought, how fortunate I am. We were, near a beach. We were in South Carolina near a beach, and here we are one evening with my parents-in-law
mm,
and my daughter and her fiancé and our other daughter, and we're having drinks, and it was chilly, but
mm,
perfect, that perfect kind of thing, and, dancing to some really fun music and
mm,
just laughing, and I thought, "This is what matters," and so I have come through to a place where these relationships are very strong now.
mm,
And that doesn't mean there won't be other hard things to come.
mm,
Doesn't mean that my relationship with my husband is all rainbows and unicorns, or that I'm always the perfect mom to our children. But it does mean that when I'm with them, or when I'm talking to them, Zooming with them, texting with them, that I'm with them. I'm
mm,
not off in my own cocoon of
yeah.
despair, and it makes a huge difference. I want more people. There was a great British show, what is his name? I'm gonna get it wrong. That Sherlock, Dr. Watson, Martin Freeman?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Martin Freeman did a show a couple of years ago called Breeders,
Mm.
that is a very interesting. At first you think it's going to be, a comedy a la Fleabag or Catastrophe, but it's much darker and harder, and it's
Mm.
about this family from the time when their kids are little, like, 2 and 5, until the kids go to
Oh
university.
wow.
And the husband and wife, everyone, the husband has, Martin Freeman has all of this terrible anger. He needs to manage his anger. He doesn't know how to do it. And it
Right.
causes, distress for everyone. And I don't want I don't mean to be reviewing a TV show
No,
on
no, no.
this
Yeah,
podcast.
I'm
What I
intrigued.
mean is, that show was illuminating for me
Mm,
because it allowed me to see after I had gotten through this how hard, you know, unresolved issues and
mm.
mental illness can be for the spouse and children. And so I just want anyone out there who's thinking, maybe I need to do some work. Watch Breeders. It's a
Mm.
good show, and I think it's been underviewed.
That's really interesting. I'm gonna check it out actually.
Yep,
That does
excellent.
sound interesting. And I feel like that we have a lot of things in common because one of the things you talked about was identity being entangled with depression. Because I'm also high functioning, and so how do you separate yourself from that with your identity and the depression? Because that is just a nightmare.
Also, Shashrati, you are just asking these questions that are so close to my heart. That's another part of the reason so many people didn't believe that I was really depressed,
Yeah,
because high functioning, and it's often women who are high
yeah,
functioning, right?
hmm
This is depression is a feminist issue,
yeah,
and as is any mental illness that a woman has, because we are the ones who engage in so much emotional labor in the
yeah.
household. And here's the interesting thing. So, my wonderful husband of decades is fantastic now about all kinds of housework. He cooks, he cleans, he does laundry, all of that stuff. But when it comes to emotional labor, which is more intangible,
Mm,
anytime something's intangible and harder to describe, I'm not trying to pick on men, but I do think it's harder for them to see.
yeah, mm,
The things like keeping connections going,
yeah,
and that can be anything from sending out holiday cards
totally.
to remembering birthdays to, all of those little bits of things like, a male parent might go to a parent-teacher conference and come back and say, "Yeah, yeah, went well. Have a beer." And, the female parent will come back and say, "We need to do this, and we need to
Yeah,
pay
yeah.
attention to this," and all those things. So, it's, I think we become more high functioning because we are detail oriented as women and femmes, and we also want to live into it's not that we're all trying to be perfect, okay? I know we're even if we watch Barbie, that doesn't mean we're all trying to be Barbie.
No.
I certainly have never been able to, go that way, but I do think we're high functioning because we don't want people to think we're letting people down.
Yeah.
So it's not let me see if I can make this clearer. It's not that we want other people to think we're perfect. We
No.
want other people to know that we care about them and that we're trying to do the things that we're supposed to do, whether it's grocery shopping or getting the PowerPoint done for the meeting in the later in the week or whatever. We really do want people to believe that we care about this stuff, even when we're struggling mightily to care about ourselves.
Yeah, just so much expectation
Yes,
on women to be
yes,
that way as well. It's sort of like, and then as a result, it's sort of like a vicious cycle. And you put it on yourself. You think you're failing, and
yes.
it's just it's hard to come out of it. And like it was really interesting because there's so many sort of vocabulary that you used within the book where I was just like, oh yes, yes, I can totally see this. And
Oh,
you know,
thank you.
oh, yeah, for sure, because I was just like, "Uh-huh, yeah, yeah." Because one thing I find with especially with trauma is I have a lot of what you call cognitive distortions. And so do you find there's a lot of magical thinking with depression?
Oh my goodness, yes. Cognitive distortions are legion. There's all this magical thinking. I was just mentioning holiday cards. I will never forget the year that not one single gift at the holidays got wrapped. I just wound up presenting them in paper bags because I was so sure that I was going to get it all done. The magical thinking was, "It's all taken care of, it's all fine," even though I wasn't actually doing anything, to take care of it. And that is a very, very strange thing. Someone who doesn't have mental illness might think, well, if you're not taking the steps to get something done, you should know that it's not going to get done. Mm-mm,
Mm-mm.
no, you can believe all kinds of things, because you you need to.
Yeah,
Sometimes the cognitive the cognitive distortion is the only thing keeping you
yeah,
going.
yeah. Coping mechanism.
Mhm,
For sure.
absolutely.
And the other thing you mentioned was the comorbidities, and I was just like, yeah, there seems. Would you say there's a lot of comorbidities with depression?
There are a lot of them, and, there are some, for instance, that I don't have. I know many people who have depression and have OCD or,
Mm,
what's the I'm trying to think. There's something else that I'm thinking of that's just not coming to mind. I do, for example, have ADHD,
yeah, yeah.
and I was diagnosed as an adult, but, looking back, I'm pretty sure I had it from the get-go, but for
Mm,
girls and women, it is not,
no.
especially for in my day, it was not discussed or recognized or anything. And so I have a feeling that if I had been diagnosed much earlier in life, that my depression might not have gotten so severe. I wouldn't have gone beyond the
Mm,
algorithm. But the comorbidities aren't just depression and ADHD.
mm,
I mean, they can be so many different things. It can be, as I mentioned, OCD. It can be, bipolar
mm,
syndrome along with schizoaffective
yeah,
disorder. It can be personality disorders along with chemical mental illness. And so, and in a way, I know there are some professionals who are now moving to thinking about personality disorders
yeah,
as mental illness.
yeah,
Um, but of course, those don't necessarily have the same chemical serotonin based kinds of things, but it doesn't mean that they don't need treatment, that they
yeah,
don't cause pain and difficulty and suffering. And that's the thing about comorbidities, I believe, is that it's sometimes I think it's almost more important to know about all of them than it is to treat just the one big thing. Does
yeah,
that make sense?
yeah.
I mean, again,
Completely.
not a professional.
No, no, but it's I think it's lived experience makes a really big difference.
Mhm.
Because I went to the recovery college, which is something in the UK here, which is great. It's like peer led, where
Mhm.
you have a professional and a peer led, someone who had lived experience who basically hold sessions
Oh,
about these things.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Like, and so there's a real understanding and real empathy when it comes to it. And it's always been said exactly that, women have always been diagnosed either with BPD instead of ADHD or with autism,
Yes,
which is more likely for men to be diagnosed with those conditions. So I was just
right.
like, it's crazy. And, I have a rare form of MS. And I honestly believe that it has all these connections to do with just, the body holding the score.
First of all, I am so sorry that you have that, and also, I completely agree with you on that. It really affects all kinds of different things, diseases, both the ones we know about and the ones that are really rare. It's okay, pain is not just like the physical "ow" pain.
No.
We know that, right? Pain can be, prolonged discomfort, pain can be emotional and mental,
Yeah.
and anytime pain goes on for a long time, it affects
Yeah.
your personality and behavior. There's just no way around that. So, I think that is a very, very important thing to realize. I've known a couple of people with, long-term MS, and
Mm,
one, person I knew, it really affected her heart, and that
mm,
is and I don't, again, know the precise, physicality of it, but there was a lot of pain because
yeah,
of the heart problems, and, you know, because she was older, this is a woman who recently died, it was in her late 80s,
mm.
um, she didn't want to try medical marijuana for the pain,
Alright,
and
yeah.
this is some years before all the great edibles that are
Yeah,
around now came out, and so didn't have the access to be able to have a gummy or a chocolate or something
yeah,
like that. She didn't wanna smell like weed, she was like, I am a, an upright
yeah,
citizen, I am a," that kind of thing,
yeah,
and I think, "Oh my goodness, we all need more ways to eliminate pain, not to so that we're all strung out,
no,
and
no,
doped up with, oxy, that's not what I'm saying,
no, no, no,
but so that we can function and that we can, just be able to do the kind of sharing that you're talking about Recovery College does.
yeah.
I love that. I want to find out more about Recovery College.
Yeah, I would totally recommend it. I think it's a really successful model in the UK that it's being implemented around the world,
Wonderful.
because it's brilliant. You know, the peer-led person is someone with lived experience of schizophrenia, of very severe mental health illnesses, but is able to hold those sessions for people who
Yes.
really need it, which is really wonderful. So yeah, I totally recommend checking it out. And
Thank you.
also, we were just talking about this before, obviously we came on, which was, I hadn't heard of double depression before. So, would you say the condition is still misunderstood, or is there some level of acceptance coming into it?
Well, okay. I think it's very much misunderstood, and it is because of something I spoke about a little while ago, which is that people do not fully understand how chemically triggered mental illnesses function, how they, don't respect, privilege or
Mm,
boundaries or anything in your life. And so I think a lot of people still disbelieve depression. They still think it's a character flaw. They still think that, oh, if only you got yourself up out of bed, or if you worked a little harder, or maybe go and have a chat with a girlfriend. There's the part in the book about when my husband and I are living in Berlin, and I
mm.
go to this therapist who was a German woman working for the American military. And she says, "Oh, you really need a hobby. You need to be out and, chatting with people." And no,
You
no,
can't do a hobby in that
that's
mindset.
and that is years before I really
Mm,
even understood. I'd known, again, as I wrote, that I had depression from adolescence on. But even, at that point in my 20s, I didn't really understand that depression could be something that was so intense.
mm,
And here's a little tip that I love from a therapist I know, who said, "What you need to do with any form of mental illness is reduce the frequency, intensity, and duration of the episodes. Those are
mm,
the things you're trying to do. You may always have
yeah.
episodes, but if you can work on frequency, intensity, and duration, then, and this has happened for me, you'll
Mm,
get to the point where months will go by without an episode of depression. When you have an episode, it won't be as intense.
Mm.
And maybe instead of being, a week in bed, it'll be an hour where you feel kind of low, but then you say, okay, I will move on. I
Mm.
will move through this. So that is a little formula that has been very helpful to me.
Yeah, that's great. That's really useful. And it's so true, especially when you have that level of like, having to deal with a mental health issue so regularly and so
Yes.
frequently. You really need to find a way to just manage it in some shape or
Yes.
form.
Yes.
And so, yeah, absolutely. And so,
Sure.
so that is interesting. That's really
Yeah.
fascinating. It's so true because you're basically having to create your own barometer for yourself
Yes.
because where do you even start?
I love that. I love the idea of creating your own barometer. That is, how we fall into the cognitive distortions, right? Because there's no one to help us
No.
see that our barometer is what I'm picturing right now, Shrishvani? I'm picturing, like, the kind of, poster board barometers when you're doing a fundraising
Oh, yeah,
drive and
yeah,
it's like a kid
yeah.
draws it or something. That's what it's like.
Yeah, completely, and you just, like, don't know where to put the mark in there.
That's
It's just
right,
like, yeah,
there's all kinds of someone's like, "Well, let's use Post-it notes,"
yeah,
and someone else is like, "No, let's use the marker
yeah.
or whatever." But yeah, I have a really good barometer now.
Ah,
It's very beautiful, works really well, and I can tell you that, it is a wonderful place to be, the place of health and contentment.
yeah. That I mean, it sounds it's such a important place to find yourself in your life because obviously some people never make it there, and so I think congratulations for making
Thank
it.
you.
It's a
Thank
real
you.
achievement because I think no one really understands how difficult that journey is. So Bethanne, what a pleasure to speak to you today and see you in your prime essentially.
Thank you. Yes, it is, it's a really interesting time to, I think, for women of all ages. We have, realized that life doesn't end, at 40. And look, I mean, look at Dame Helen Mirren. My
Yeah,
God.
wow. I love her. Yeah, I love
I
her.
love her so much. Look at Emma Thompson.
Yeah.
These women, and I'm thinking English just because I'm speaking to you and you're in London, but we have great examples over here too. But
Oh, yeah, Meryl
one
Streep, I love her.
Meryl Streep, yeah. And
Yeah.
one last thing I would love to mention is that um, Missing Pages, the
Yes.
podcast that's for the Podglomerate or produced by the Podglomerate, it's in season 2, and it's all about publishing. And one of the things that I think is really important is that when I started 2 years ago with the Podglomerate and working on this show, my experience with mental health, they were very open to letting
Mm,
it play into how we approached some of the subjects and topics.
mm,
Now, we changed things up. Everything's different. Our first season was mostly about individuals. The second season is more about processes, in publishing.
mm.
But I just want to say a big shout out to the Podglomerate for really leaning in to my journey and the way I look at things, because that's part of it too. Part of it, and one of the things I love about millennials and Gen Z people is that younger people really are more educated about mental challenges
Mm,
in our
yeah,
society. And so the work environment has changed
yeah.
from when I was in my 20s and you never spoke about personal anything.
Mhm.
Now it's okay. And you can say, listen, I have this challenge, and that doesn't mean it's going to affect my work, but it does actually give me ideas about my work,
Yeah.
and people will listen. I love that. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that as well because it's good for everyone to know about Podglomerate and the work that you're doing in Missing
Yes.
Pages as well. So do check that out. So, yeah, I'll be definitely checking it out myself as well as a fellow publishing person. So yes.
Excellent.
So yeah, absolutely. So again, Bethanne, thank you so much for joining me today and taking the time to share your incredible story. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Shoshwati. I really had a great time speaking with you today, and take very good care. Be well.
You too.